In the quiet suburb of Millbrook, where the streets were lined with oak trees and modest homes, lived Tom and Sarah Wilkins. If you're not part of this community yet, click the subscribe button and join us. Their story was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test the very foundations of their marriage and force them to confront the true meaning of wealth and happiness. Tom Wilkins trudged up the driveway, his shoulders sagging under the weight of another exhausting day. The setting sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn, and the chirping of crickets filled the air. At 42, Tom's once jet-black hair was now peppered with gray, and lines had begun to form at the corners of his eyes, testaments to years of laughter and stress in equal measure. As he reached for the front door handle, a sudden impulse seized him. Instead of going inside, he turned and walked the short distance to the corner store. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and Mr. Patel, the owner, greeted him with a warm smile. "Rough day, Tom?" Mr. Patel asked, noticing the weariness in Tom's eyes. Tom nodded, managing a weak smile. "You could say that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for teaching anymore." Mr. Patel chuckled sympathetically. But think of all the young minds you're shaping. Help their families." But as the initial shock wore off, a nagging doubt crept in. He and Sarah had been arguing about money more frequently lately. She wanted to start a family, but Tom insisted they couldn't afford it. Would this sudden windfall solve their problems, or create new ones? Tom's gaze fell on a framed photo of him and Sarah on their wedding day. They looked so young, so full of hope and dreams. When had things become so complicated? With trembling hands, Tom folded the ticket and slipped it into his desk drawer. He needed time to think, to plan. Just for now, he decided, he would keep this to himself. As he crawled into bed beside Sarah's sleeping form, Tom felt the weight of his secret pressing down on him. He told himself it was for the best, that he would tell her soon. But deep down, a small voice whispered that he had just changed the course of their lives forever. The weeks that followed were a study in contradiction for Tom. Outwardly, nothing had changed. He still woke at 6:30 every morning, showered, and dressed in his usual attire of khakis and a button-down shirt. He still kissed Sarah goodbye, though lately he found himself lingering a moment longer, as if trying to memorize the feel of her lips against his. At Millbrook Middle School, Tom went through the motions of teaching, explaining the intricacies of algebra and the significance of historical events to rooms full of disinterested 13-year-olds. But inwardly, his mind was a whirlwind of possibilities and plans. During his free period, Tom would often find himself in a quiet corner of the teacher's lounge, hunched over his laptop, researching investment strategies and wealth management. He created a secret email account to communicate with financial advisors, always careful to clear his browser history afterward. One particularly memorable day, Tom sat across from a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, in a sleek downtown office that made him acutely aware of his scuffed shoes and bargain store watch. "Mr. Wilkins," the financial advisor said, leaning forward with a practiced smile, "$20 million is a life-changing sum, but it's important to approach this windfall strategically. Have you considered how you want to receive the funds? Lump sum or annuity payments?" Tom nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "I've been leaning towards the lump sum. After taxes, it'll be less, but I think having control over the full amount will be better in the long run." The advisor nodded approvingly. "A wise choice. Now, let's discuss diversification. We'll want to spread your investments across various asset classes. That's worth something, isn't it?" "I suppose you're right," Tom agreed, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. His eyes wandered to the lottery ticket dispenser behind the counter. "You know what? Give me a quick pick for tonight's drawing." As Mr. Patel printed the ticket, Tom felt a tiny spark of excitement. It was silly, he knew, but for a moment he allowed himself to imagine a different life, one free from the constant worry about bills and the future. Later that night, after a quiet dinner with Sarah, Tom sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of ungraded papers. The house was silent, save for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Sarah's parents. Tom rubbed his eyes, feeling the strain of reading yet another poorly written essay on the American Revolution. Almost as an afterthought, he pulled out his phone and checked the lottery numbers. His heart nearly stopped as he compared them to his ticket. Once, twice, 3 times he checked, scarcely able to believe his eyes. $20 million. He had won $20 million. Tom's mind reeled. This was it. The answer to all their problems. No more worrying about the mortgage, no more scrimping and saving for retirement. They could travel, donate to causes they cared about. As the meeting progressed, Tom felt a mix of excitement and terror. The possibilities seemed endless, but so did the potential pitfalls. He left the office with a thick folder of documents and a head spinning with terms like mutual funds, real estate investment trusts, and offshore accounts. At home, the weight of his secret grew heavier with each passing day. Sarah, ever perceptive, sensed the change in him. She would catch him staring off into space during dinner or frowning at his phone when he thought she wasn't looking. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing, enjoying the warm summer breeze, Sarah turned to him with concern in her eyes. "Tom, is everything okay? You've seemed distant lately." Tom's heart raced. For a moment he considered telling her everything right then and there, but the words caught in his throat. "I'm fine," he said, forcing a smile. "Just been thinking about the future a lot lately." Sarah's face lit up. "Really?" "Because I've been thinking too. I know we've talked about starting a family before, and I know you're worried about the finances, but I really think we could make it work. Maybe if we—" "Not now, Sarah," Tom interrupted, more harshly than he intended. The hurt look on her face made him immediately regret his tone. "I'm sorry. I need some time to figure things out. Can we talk about this later?" Sarah nodded slowly, but the light had gone out of her eyes. As they sat in uncomfortable silence, Tom felt the invisible wall between them grow a little higher. That night, unable to sleep, Tom crept downstairs to his study. He pulled out the lottery ticket from its hiding place and stared at it, the numbers now burned into his memory. With a deep sigh, he opened his laptop and began drafting an email to the Lottery Commission. It was time to claim his prize. As he typed, Tom tried to convince himself that he was doing the right thing. Once everything was set up, he would tell Sarah. They would have a secure future, free from financial worries. She could quit her job if she wanted. They could start a family, travel the world. But a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that something precious was slipping away, something that no amount of money could replace. Sarah Wilkins had always prided herself on her intuition. As a social worker, it was a skill that served her well in her professional life. But lately, that same intuition was sending alarm bells ringing in her personal life, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in her marriage. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on. Exactly. Tom was still Tom. Kind, dependable, loving. But there was a new distance between them, a gulf that seemed to widen with each passing day. She caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Was it guilt? Regret? Whatever it was, it scared her. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, while Tom was out running errands, Sarah found herself wandering restlessly through their modest home. Her fingers trailed along the spines of books on the shelves, pausing at the faded copy of The Great Gatsby that Tom had given her when they were dating. On a whim, she pulled it out, smiling at the memory of their long discussions about the American dream and what it truly meant. As she flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. Curious, Sarah picked it up and unfolded it. Her breath caught as she recognized Tom's handwriting. The paper yellowed with age. It was a letter, dated 10 years ago, addressed to her but never sent. With trembling hands, Sarah began to read. My dearest Sarah, I'm writing this letter on the eve of our first anniversary, though I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to give it to you. There's so much I want to say, so many dreams I have for our future together. I know we don't have much right now. Our apartment is tiny. Our furniture is secondhand, and we eat more ramen than we probably should. But when I look at you, I see a wealth that no amount of money could ever match. I dream of the life we'll build together. Not a life of luxury or extravagance, but one rich in experiences and love. I imagine us growing old in a house filled with laughter, surrounded by the family we'll create. I see us traveling, not to fancy resorts, but to places where we can make a difference, where we can use our skills to help others. I promise you, Sarah, that I will always strive to be the man you deserve. I may not be able to give you everything, but I will give you all of me. My love, my support, my dreams. They're all yours. Sometimes I worry that I'm not enough, that you deserve more than what I can offer. But then you look at me with those beautiful eyes of yours, and I know that together we have everything we need. Our love is my greatest treasure, Sarah. No matter what the future holds, no matter what challenges we face, I know that as long as we have each other, we'll be the richest people in the world. All my love, Tom. Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she finished reading. She clutched the letter to her chest, her mind reeling. This was the Tom she had fallen in love with. Idealistic, passionate, full of dreams that had nothing to do with material wealth. But as she reread the letter, a painful realization struck her. When had they lost sight of these dreams? When had their conversations about the future shifted from making a difference in the world to worrying about mortgage payments and retirement funds? The Tom who wrote this letter seemed so far removed from the man she lived with now, the man who dodged her questions about starting a family, who spent hours locked away in his study doing God knows what. Sarah's mind raced back over the past few weeks, cataloging all the little changes in Tom's behavior. The secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in the financial news, the way he would sometimes look at her with what she now recognized as guilt. A terrible thought began to form in her mind. Was Tom having an affair? The idea seemed absurd. Tom, who had always been the epitome of fidelity and honesty. But what else could explain the change in him? As if on cue, she heard the front door open, followed by the sound of Tom's footsteps in the hallway. Sarah quickly folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation she knew they needed to have. "Sarah?" Tom called out. "I'm home. Where are you?" Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of unspoken words heavy on her heart. When she opened them again, she was resolved. Whatever was going on, whatever secrets lay between them, she would get to the bottom of it. For the sake of the love they once shared, for the dreams they had written about in that forgotten letter, she would fight for their marriage. "I'm in the living room, Tom," she called back, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "We need to talk." The tension in the Wilkins household had reached a breaking point. Tom's birthday, once a day of celebration and affection, now loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon. Sarah, determined to rekindle the connection they once shared, threw herself into planning a small, intimate party. She invited a handful of their closest friends, prepared Tom's favorite meal, and even baked a cake from scratch, something she hadn't done in years. As Sarah bustled around the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on the dinner, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. She remembered birthdays past, filled with laughter and shared dreams. Now she felt like she was trying to bridge an ever-widening chasm with a few balloons and a homemade cake. Tom arrived home from work, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of his secret wealth and the growing guilt that accompanied it. He barely noticed the festive decorations or the delicious aroma wafting from the kitchen. "Happy birthday, honey," Sarah greeted him with forced cheer, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. Tom returned the kiss automatically, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Thanks, Sarah," he mumbled, his gaze already drifting towards his study. "I just need to check something quickly before—" "Tom," Sarah interrupted, a note of desperation in her voice. "Please, our friends will be here any minute. Can't whatever it is wait?" Tom hesitated, torn between his consuming secret and the pleading look in his wife's eyes. Finally, with a small nod, he allowed Sarah to lead him into the living room. The evening that followed was a study in uncomfortable silences and stilted conversation. Their friends, picking up on the tension between the couple, tried their best to keep the mood light. But Tom's distraction was palpable, his responses to questions and jokes delayed and half-hearted. Sarah watched him from across the room, her heart breaking a little more with each forced smile, each glance at his watch. This man, who sat surrounded by people who loved him, seemed a million miles away. As the last guest departed, leaving behind a wake of dirty dishes and half-empty wine glasses, Sarah turned to Tom with tears shimmering in her eyes. "What's happened to us, Tom?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom, startled by the raw emotion in her voice, felt a wave of guilt wash over him. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he knew all too well what she was talking about. "This!" Sarah gestured between them. "Us! We used to be so close, so in sync. Now I feel like I'm living with a stranger. You're always distracted, always hiding away in your study. What aren't you telling me, Tom?" Tom opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could he explain? How could he tell her that he'd won a fortune, that he'd been planning their future in secret, thinking he was protecting her? Sarah pressed on, years of pent-up frustration and fear pouring out. "Is there someone else? Are you unhappy with me? With our life? Because if you are, please just tell me. I can handle the truth, Tom, but I can't handle this distance between us." "No!" Tom exclaimed, horrified at the suggestion. "God, no, Sarah. There's no one else. How could you think that?" "Then what is it?" Sarah demanded. "Something's changed, Tom. I'm not blind and I'm not stupid. You're hiding something from me, and it's tearing us apart." Tom felt the weight of his secret pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. He wanted to confess, to lay everything bare, but fear held him back. Fear of her reaction, fear of admitting he'd kept such a monumental secret, fear of the changes that would inevitably follow. I can't explain right now," he said finally, hating himself for the pain he saw flash across Sarah's face. "But I promise you, Sarah, I love you. Only you. Whatever you're thinking, it's not that." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Truth? Reassurance? Whatever it was, she didn't seem to find it. With a small, defeated shake of her head, she turned away. "I'm going to bed," she said quietly. "Happy birthday, Tom." As Sarah's footsteps faded up the stairs, Tom stood rooted to the spot, the weight of his secret pressing down on him like never before. The remnants of the birthday celebration, deflated balloons, dirty plates, and half-empty glasses, seemed to mock him. This moment, he realized, was a turning point. The chasm between him and Sarah was widening, and if he didn't act soon, it might become unbridgeable. With a heavy sigh, Tom began to clean up, his mind racing. As he mechanically rinsed dishes and wiped down surfaces, he replayed Sarah's words in his head. The pain in her voice, the fear in her eyes. It was all because of him, because of the choices he'd made. He thought back to the day he'd bought that fateful lottery ticket, to the moment he'd decided to keep his win a secret. At the time, it had seemed logical, even noble. He was protecting their relationship from the upheaval that sudden wealth could bring. He was planning for their future, ensuring they'd never have to worry about money again. But now, faced with the reality of what his secrecy had done to their marriage, Tom couldn't help but question everything. What good was financial security if it came at the cost of the trust and intimacy he shared with Sarah? As he put away the last of the dishes, Tom's eyes fell on a framed photo of him and Sarah on their honeymoon. They looked so young, so carefree, their faces glowing with love and the promise of a shared future. What would those younger versions of themselves think of the mess he'd made? With a sudden clarity, Tom knew what he had to do. The truth, no matter how difficult, was the only way forward. He couldn't bear another day of seeing the hurt and confusion in Sarah's eyes, couldn't stand the thought of her imagining worst-case scenarios to explain his behavior. Determined, Tom made his way upstairs. He paused outside their bedroom door, taking a deep breath to steady himself. This was it, the moment that would change everything. But as terrifying as it was, he knew it was necessary. Their love, their partnership, the dreams they'd shared, it was all worth fighting for. Slowly, he opened the door. Sarah was sitting up in bed, her back against the headboard, staring out the window. Even in the dim light, He could see the tracks of tears on her cheeks. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, her eyes wary but attentive. Tom moved to sit on the edge of the bed, close enough to reach out and take her hand, but he hesitated, unsure if the gesture would be welcome. "I've been keeping something from you," he began, his heart pounding in his chest. "Something big. And I realize now that trying to handle it on my own was a huge mistake. I've hurt you and our relationship, and I'm so sorry for that." Sarah's expression was a mix of apprehension and curiosity. "What is it, Tom? Please, just tell me the truth." Tom took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "A few weeks ago, I won the lottery. $20 million. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah's eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to process this information. 20 million? But how? Why didn't you tell me? She finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. And so, Tom began to explain. He told her about buying the ticket on a whim, about the shock of realizing he'd won, about his fears and doubts. He spoke of his meetings with financial advisors, his plans for their future, his misguided attempts to protect her, and their relationship from the potential pitfalls of sudden wealth. As he talked, the words pouring out of him in a torrent of confession and apology, Tom watched Sarah's face carefully. He saw shock give way to hurt, then anger, then a complex mix of emotions he couldn't quite decipher. When he finally fell silent, the room was thick with tension. Sarah sat very still, her gaze fixed on their joined hands. When had they started holding hands? Tom couldn't remember, but he clung to the connection like a lifeline. "I don't know what to say," Sarah said at last, her voice trembling. "I understand why you thought you were protecting us. But Tom, don't you see? By keeping this from me, you've done exactly what you were trying to prevent. You've let money come between us." Tom nodded, shame washing over him. "I know. I see that now, and I'm so sorry, Sarah. I never meant to hurt you, to make you doubt us. I love you more than anything in this world, more than any amount of money. Can you forgive me?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Tom felt his heart constrict with fear. What if this was too much? What if he damaged their relationship beyond repair? Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I love you too, Tom. And I believe that you thought you were doing the right thing. But this is going to take some time. We have a lot to talk about, a lot to figure out." Tom nodded eagerly, relief flooding through him. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a chance to rebuild, to reconnect, to find their way back to each other. "We'll figure it out together," he promised, squeezing her hand gently. "No more secrets. No more plans made alone. Whatever happens next, we face it as a team, just like we always should have." Sarah managed a small smile, the first real one he'd seen from her in weeks. "Okay," she said, "together." As they sat there in the quiet of their bedroom, hands intertwined, Tom felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. They had trust to rebuild, decisions to make, a new reality to navigate. But for the first time since he'd bought that lottery ticket, he felt truly lucky. Not because of the money, but because he had a second chance with the woman he loved. The digital clock on the nightstand ticked over to midnight, marking the end of Tom's birthday and the beginning of a new day. And with it, the start of a new chapter in their lives, one they would write together, come what may. The days that followed Tom's confession were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. Sarah, still reeling from the shock of their newfound wealth, found herself oscillating between excitement, anger, and fear. The money itself was overwhelming enough, but the fact that Tom had kept such a monumental secret from her for weeks cut deep. They spent long hours talking, sometimes arguing, always trying to understand each other's perspective. Tom explained his fears about how the money might change them, while Sarah expressed her hurt at being left out of such a life-altering decision. One evening, as they sat on their worn couch, a piece of furniture that suddenly seemed absurdly out of place in the context of their new reality, Sarah turned to Tom with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something too," she said, her voice hesitant. "I've been keeping my own secret, and after everything that's happened, I realize how wrong that was." Tom felt a chill run down his spine. After everything they'd been through, what more could there be? "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Remember how I've been feeling tired lately? How I missed a few days of work last month?" Tom nodded, a knot forming in his stomach. "Well, I went to see Dr. Patel. She ran some tests. And, Tom, I have a condition. It's treatable, but it's serious." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sarah explained her diagnosis, a rare autoimmune disorder that would require extensive treatment. As she spoke, Tom felt a maelstrom of emotions. Fear for Sarah's health, guilt for not noticing her symptoms earlier, and a strange sense of relief that the lottery winnings could now be used for something truly important. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Tom asked, echoing the very question Sarah had posed to him days earlier. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears. "I was scared. I didn't want to worry you, and I guess I was hoping that if I didn't talk about it, it somehow wouldn't be real." "Pretty stupid, huh?" Tom pulled her into a tight embrace, his own eyes stinging. "No, not stupid. I understand. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry you've been dealing with this alone. But you're not alone anymore, okay? We'll face this together." As they held each other, both crying now, Tom marveled at the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. The lottery win, which had seemed like the answer to all their problems, now paled in comparison to the challenge they faced. Yet, paradoxically, it also provided a solution they wouldn't have had otherwise. Over the next few weeks, Tom and Sarah threw themselves into researching Sarah's condition and the best treatment options available. The lottery winnings, which had been a source of such conflict, now became a lifeline. They were able to consult top specialists, explore cutting-edge treatments, and even consider experimental therapies that would have been far out of reach before. One afternoon, as they sat in yet another doctor's office, waiting for a consultation, Sarah reached over and took Tom's hand. "You know," she said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips, "in a weird way, I'm almost grateful for that lottery ticket." Tom looked at her in surprise. "Really? After all the trouble it caused?" Sarah nodded. "Don't get me wrong, I'm still not happy about the secrecy. But if you hadn't won, we'd be facing this with nothing but worry about how to pay for everything. Instead, we can focus on getting better without that added stress. It's like the universe knew we'd need this money." Tom squeezed her hand, marveling at her ability to find silver linings even in the darkest clouds. "You're amazing, you know that? I don't deserve you." "Oh, hush," Sarah said, but her eyes sparkled with affection. "We deserve each other. And we're going to get through this, just like we've gotten through everything else." As the doctor called them in, Tom felt a surge of determination. They had been given an incredible gift, and he was going to make sure they used it wisely. Not just for Sarah's treatment, but to build the life they had always dreamed of. A life of purpose, of giving back, of making a difference. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with uncertainties and difficult decisions. But as they walked into the doctor's office hand in hand, Tom knew one thing for certain. Whatever came their way, they would face it together. And that, more than any amount of money, made him feel like the luckiest man in the world. As summer faded into autumn, the Wilkins household settled into a new rhythm. Sarah's treatment had begun in earnest, a grueling regimen of medications and therapies that left her exhausted but determined. Tom, true to his word, was by her side every step of the way, juggling his teaching duties with hospital visits and endless research into her condition. The lottery winnings, once a source of such turmoil, had become a silent partner in their fight. It afforded them the best medical care available, allowed Sarah to take a leave of absence from her job without financial worry, and gave Tom the flexibility to be there for her whenever she needed him. One crisp October morning, as they sat in the hospital waiting room for yet another appointment, Sarah turned to Tom with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking a lot about that letter you wrote years ago, the one I found in that old book." Tom felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with a touch of embarrassment. "Oh? What about it?" Sarah's eyes took on a distant look, as if she were seeing beyond the sterile hospital walls to a future not yet realized. "You wrote about wanting to make a difference, about using our skills to help others. I think, I think maybe this is our chance to do that." Tom leaned in, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Well," Sarah continued, warming to her topic, "we've been so focused on my treatment, which is important, don't get me wrong. But I can't help thinking about all the other people out there facing similar battles without the resources we have. What if we could do something to help them?" As Sarah outlined her idea, a foundation to support research into rare autoimmune disorders and to assist patients struggling with the financial burden of treatment, Tom felt a familiar spark of excitement. This was the Sarah he had fallen in love with, the passionate idealist who always thought of others, even in her own times of need. Over the next few months, as Sarah's health slowly improved, they threw themselves into bringing her vision to life. They consulted with lawyers and nonprofit experts, reached out to medical professionals and patient advocacy groups. The dining room table became command central, covered in laptops, legal pads, and medical journals. Tom, drawing on his teaching experience, developed educational programs to raise awareness about autoimmune disorders in schools and communities. Sarah, between treatments, used her social work background to design support systems for patients and their families. As word of their foundation spread, they began to receive letters and emails from people all over the country, stories of struggle and hope, of resilience in the face of devastating diagnoses. Each one strengthened their resolve and reminded them of the real impact their work could have. One evening, as they sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Sarah leaned her head on Tom's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. Tom kissed the top of her head. "For what?" "For this. For everything. For turning what could have been a curse into a blessing." Tom chuckled. "I think you've got that backwards, love. You're the one who saw the potential for good in all of this. I was too busy worrying about bank accounts and investment strategies." Sarah lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining with a mix of love and mischief. "Well, I guess we make a pretty good team then, don't we? You handle the money, I'll handle the vision." As they laughed together, Tom marveled at the journey they'd been on. From the secrecy and fear that had nearly torn them apart to this moment of shared purpose and renewed connection. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but he knew they were stronger for having weathered the storm together. The lottery win, which had once seemed like the answer to all their problems, had indeed changed their lives, but not in the way Tom had initially imagined. Instead of a life of luxury and ease, it had given them the means to make a real difference in the world, to touch lives, to offer hope, to be the change they wanted to see. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Tom and Sarah sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of the future they were building together. A future not defined by the amount in their bank account, but by the lives they could touch, the hope they could offer, and the love that had brought them through their darkest hours. The porch swing creaked gently as they rocked, a soothing counterpoint to the chirping of crickets and the distant laughter of neighborhood children. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of a late summer evening and the promise of a meaningful tomorrow, Tom knew that they had found something far more valuable than any lottery jackpot. They had rediscovered their purpose, their passion, and most importantly, each other. As the seasons turned and years passed, the Wilkins life settled into a new normal, one filled with purpose, challenges, and an ever-deepening bond. Their foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams, touching thousands of lives across the country. Sarah's health, while requiring ongoing management, had stabilized, allowing her to throw herself fully into their shared mission. Tom, inspired by their journey, had left his teaching position to work full-time on the Foundation's educational initiatives. He found a new calling in developing programs that not only raised awareness about autoimmune disorders, but also taught young people about empathy, resilience, and the power of community support. One sunny afternoon, 5 years to the day since Tom had bought that fateful lottery ticket, they stood hand in hand on a stage in front of a crowd of hundreds. It was the grand opening of the Wilkins Center for Autoimmune Research and Support, a state-of-the-art facility that would serve as both a cutting-edge research hub and a welcoming space for patients and families navigating the complexities of chronic illness. As Sarah stepped up to the microphone to deliver her speech, Tom watched her with a heart full of pride and love. She looked radiant, her eyes bright with excitement and purpose. The struggles of the past few years had left their mark. A few strands of gray in her hair, lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and worry, but to Tom, she had never been more beautiful. 5 years ago, Sarah began, her voice clear and strong, my husband and I received two pieces of news that would change our lives forever. One was a diagnosis that filled us with fear and uncertainty. The other was a stroke of luck that many would consider a dream come true. But standing here today, I can tell you that the true fortune wasn't the money we won. It was the journey it allowed us to embark on, and the lives we've been privileged to touch along the way. As Sarah continued her speech, detailing the work of their foundation and the hopes for the new center, Tom found his mind drifting back over the years. He remembered the gut-wrenching fear he'd felt when Sarah first told him about her condition, the sleepless nights spent researching treatments, the moments of despair when it seemed like nothing was working. But he also remembered the triumphs, the first time a treatment showed real promise, the day Sarah was strong enough to return to work at the foundation. The tears of joy they'd shed when they received a letter from a family whose child had benefited from one of their research grants. Tom's reverie was broken by the sound of applause. Sarah had finished her speech and was now gesturing for him to join her at the podium. As he stepped forward, she squeezed his hand, a gesture that still sent a thrill through him after all these years. None of this would have been possible without my partner in all things, my husband Tom, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. He taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is to let someone in, to share your burdens as well as your joys. Together we learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the difference we can make in the lives of others. As the audience applauded again, Tom leaned into the microphone. Sarah's being too modest, he said with a smile. She's the real hero of this story. She took what could have been a personal tragedy and turned it into a mission to help others. She reminds me every day of the power of resilience, compassion, and love. The rest of the day passed in a blur of ribbon-cutting ceremonies, tours of the new facility, and conversations with researchers, patients, and supporters. It wasn't until late that evening, as Tom and Sarah walked hand in hand through the quiet, empty halls of the center, that they had a moment to themselves. "Can you believe it?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed with awe. "All of this from one little lottery ticket." Tom chuckled, pulling her close. "I think it's more accurate to say all of this came from one amazing woman with a big heart and an even bigger vision." Sarah playfully swatted his arm. "Flatterer. But seriously, Tom, did you ever imagine, back when you were hiding that ticket in your desk drawer, that this is where we'd end up?" Tom shook his head, his expression turning thoughtful. "Never in a million years. I thought I was protecting our future, but I was thinking too small. You taught me to dream bigger, to see beyond our own needs, to the needs of others." They paused by a large window overlooking the city, the lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Sarah leaned her head on Tom's shoulder, a familiar and comforting gesture. "You know," she said softly, "I was thinking about that letter again. The one you wrote all those years ago, about the life you dreamed for us." Tom felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him. "What about it?" Sarah lifted her head to meet his gaze, her eyes shining. "I think we did it, Tom. Not in the way we expected, but we've built a life rich in experiences. We're using our skills to help others. We're making a difference." Tom felt a lump form in his throat as the truth of her words sank in. They had faced challenges he never could have imagined when he wrote that letter, but they had also achieved things beyond his wildest dreams. "We did, didn't we?" he said, his voice husky with emotion. "And you know what? I still feel like the luckiest man in the world, but not because of any lottery, because I have you." Sarah's response was to rise on her tiptoes and kiss him, a kiss full of love, gratitude, and the promise of more adventures to come. As they left the center that night, walking arm in arm under a canopy of stars, Tom reflected on the strange and wonderful path their lives had taken. The lottery win, which had once seemed like the most important thing in the world, had faded into the background, overshadowed by the richness of the life they had built together. They had faced illness and uncertainty, had grappled with secrets and fears, had learned the true meaning of wealth and fortune. And through it all, they had discovered that the greatest jackpot wasn't one you could buy a ticket for. It was the love you shared, the lives you touched, and the legacy you left behind. As they reached their car, Sarah paused, looking back at the center that bore their name. "So," she said, a hint of mischief in her voice, "what's next for us, Mr. Wilkins?" Tom laughed, feeling a familiar spark of excitement at the prospect of new challenges. "I don't know, Mrs. Wilkins, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." And as they drove home through the quiet streets, Tom knew that whatever the future held, they had already won the greatest prize of all, a life filled with purpose, compassion, and enduring love. The lucky ticket had opened a door, but it was their choices, their resilience, and their unwavering commitment to each other that had truly transformed their lives. In the end, Tom realized, their story wasn't really about winning the lottery at all. It was about two people who had learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought. They had to be lived, shared, and cherished. And in that, they were richer than they ever could have imagined.